Welcome to Profiles on Nantucket Community Television's Channel 18. I'm Charlie Walters. On June 9th, 2020, Nantucket witnessed the first successful reintroduction into Nantucket waters of a rescued and rehabilitated gray seal who would come to be known as Quaddy. This was accomplished under the direction of people from two organizations, both of which are represented on today's program. Scott Leonard is Director of Operations of the Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket, and you may have seen Scott on an earlier edition of Profiles in which he detailed the history and the workings of his organization. And also here is Lisa Becker, who is Animal Care Manager of the National Marine Life Center in Bourne, Massachusetts. Welcome to you both, and thank you for doing this show remotely.
Pleasure to be
Scott,
here,
I'll begin with you. When and how did the Marine Mammal Alliance learn about Quaddy?
We were informed by the public of a small seal off of Hulbert Avenue, which is basically an in-town beach right there at the Jetties. And I went down and observed the animal and found a very small, very young male gray seal on the beach. He was a little bit thin, so we decided that what we would do was observe him and see what his condition became and which way he went. After 4 days of that, and all of that time being in touch with the National Marine Life Center, because they are our go-to organization for any rehab that's done, and we need to have space there because they have a limited amount of space, and they're taking a lot of animals from different areas. It was determined after 4 days, watching Quaddy get really thin. I mean, he was emaciated to the point of being a bag of bones, and I believe, and at least can confirm this, 11 kg at the time that we actually made the decision to bring him to the ferry. We kenneled him, put him in the back of a pickup truck, drove him to the Highline ferry. The Highline is very good about bringing animals and a person over to for these purposes, and we brought him over to Hyannis. The National Marine Life Center met us in Hyannis, and we put him in their truck, and they brought him back to Bourne.
Now, did this all happen on the same day?
No, it was over a 4-day period. The first day we observed him was January 19th, and I believe it was the 23rd the decision was made, and he went off on the 24th.
Okay, so all of those things were over a period of 4 days.
Yeah.
How long would you say the seal was at this point?
How long? How old?
Yeah, you told us the weight. I'm trying to get a picture in my mind of how long the seal was.
Tiny, and maybe Lisa can answer that lengthwise. He was 11 kg, so a little over 20 pounds. I would guess in the vicinity. I'm going to pull out a tape measure. Watch this. Okay. When we picked up Quaddy, he was a very underweight, emaciated little guy of about 32, 33 inches.
Do you want
11
me to?
kilograms in pounds would be what?
We work with the metric system. So yeah, he was 11.6 kilograms and he was 85 centimeters long when he was admitted.
So just trying to get the picture in my head, that is a very thin creature.
So it's probably about 25 pounds is my guess. Is that about right?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, I want to go back to the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm.
You had a call from the public. Obviously, you didn't get there immediately, so there was a bit of a time lag. But I'm curious, if somebody is walking on the beach tomorrow and sees a seal that appears to be ailing, what should they do and what should they not do, in brief?
In brief, they shouldn't approach the animal. We have a very interesting scenario here on Nantucket where people, reporting parties, will have walked around a sand dune and be on top of an animal. Or they'll walk down the beach and all of a sudden they're right next to a seal that's hauled out on the beach. And I often, in fact, usually get photographs from reporting parties of animals that they're standing right next to. What I always inform the public is, back off. I appreciate your photograph, back off. What we don't want to do on Nantucket is change the animal's behavior. That's actually breaking federal law. So the federal guidelines is 150 feet. Really hard to do on Nantucket without closing beaches down. But changing the animal's behavior is actually the law. And so what I ask people to do is back off, don't have the animal hiss at you, certainly don't flush it towards the water, don't pour water on it, and don't take selfies with it and things like that.
Well, sometimes you will see a healthy seal just lying on the beach having a good time.
Usually.
If you can't get too close to a seal and you're not sure whether the seal is ailing or not, how should one, what's the best way to approach a situation like that? You don't want to leave a sick animal on the beach, and yet how do you find out it is sick?
Well, our practices, I mean, we get phone calls often through the police department, because police will, the responding reporting party will call the police dispatch, and we will get the message through the police department. We also have a hotline number, and I'll repeat that several times in this conversation, is 833-667-6626. We don't mind phone calls about healthy animals, and we often get phone calls about healthy animals. We ask questions. Is the animal entangled? Do you see injuries? Do you see bite marks or wounds? And as the conversation goes on, we as the team usually get a pretty good idea of what condition that animal is in. And so we can tell the reporting party, hey, it sounds good to us. It's lying on its side, it's sunning. Seals spend 40 to 50% of their time on land. They go there to digest, to warm up, and most importantly, as a marine mammal, to sleep. That's where they can turn their brain off and just go to sleep. In the water, they have to keep half their brain on all the time.
Let's get back to Quaddy in particular. Tell us more about the process of getting the seal from the beach onto the ferry. I know it happened over 4 days, but tell us more about precisely what you had to do.
Precisely, as I say, we observed for 4 days. So the first day observation was down to the beach. We put up signage, we put up tape. It happened to be right in front of the old John Kerry house. And,
so the seal was not moved until the day he left the island?
Correct.
Was there a 24-hour watch? Was there a 24-hour watch?
Not 24-hour watch. Remember, we're a group of volunteers, and there's really a handful of us. So we will go down to a particular animal as often as we can, see what's going on, see what has changed. The signage is the most important thing that we can put in place and leave there for other members of the public to see and hopefully read. It has 5 bullet points on it, and that's really important information. A lot of our outreach is about educating the public, educating the stakeholders here on island.
Did you try to feed him?
No. And I would suggest that no one tries to feed a seal. That is something that is breaking the law, and that the National Marine Life Center is totally in charge of when they have an animal in rehab. We don't feed animals.
Give us the specifics of getting the seal from the beach to the ferry, first of all.
With a little ill animal like Quaddy, it was really quite simple. You bring the dog kennel down to the beach, you get 2 people together. He was very complacent, not reacting at all. So we were able to just guide him into the kennel with a couple of people, close the kennel door, put him in the back of the truck, and drive him straight over the High Line. High Line does take us back and forth for free, which is really amazing. They always set it up. We can bring the truck onto Straight Wharf and carry the kennel out. We try and get the kennel on the boat last, so there's less noise, and then off the boat on the other side first, so that we can get ahead of any crowd that's there. And that's the process. With Quaddy, when we got there, actually the National Marine Life Center staff that was on hand looked at them and said, we need to get some intravenous in this. And I helped them put the needle in, but they're the guiding force.
Let's switch over to Lisa. Now, were you personally there at the boat when the seal came on the boat?
I was not. No, we have a small team of staff here, and we also have a large group of volunteers and interns as well that help us with these processes. So I was actually on site to prepare for his arrival. So it takes a lot to, as Scott already described, to bring a seal from a beach to our hospital, especially if it's in a remote location, it's on an island, it's a few hours away. So there's quite some preparation that's involved with this. So we typically try to break off into tasks or responsibilities to make the admission happen as quickly as we can. These, like a rescue like this, and also the admission to a hospital is very, very stressful for a wild animal like Quaddy was. So we have to be very careful to not stress that animal out any further. Stress can also really, threaten an animal's life if it becomes overwhelming. So we try to have everything ready to go, and then admit the animal with what is most needed and what the priorities are from a medical and scientific perspective, and then give that animal some rest.
Now, when Quaddy first got to your facility, he had been out of the water for at least 4 days. Given his condition otherwise, how did being out of the water for so long make it worse, or did it make it worse?
It most likely did not make it worse. In fact, Quaddy was so young, he was a dependent pup, which means that he would have still been with his mother. He was not an independent seal yet who would go into the water and feed on its own. Most likely, he had never been in the ocean at the point when he was found. So being on the beach was no problem for him. In fact, even if he had been in the ocean before, he would have probably come out because he was not doing well. So as Scott had already explained, seals, they come on land for multiple reasons, and they do this deliberately. They might just be resting because they can't swim all day, all night. So they need to rest just like we do as well. There's also other reasons for them to come on land. It might be for mating purposes. It might be for pupping purposes, or for molting. So they do this for a good reason. So seals should not be put back in water when they are out on the beach. So in his case, again, he was so young that he was most likely there and just had not been in the ocean. So so there was no problem for him being on the beach there for a couple of days.
I know you can't answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. Where was the mother? Where might the mother have been?
Yeah, that is a really valid question, and of course we all wish we knew. There are, of course, many reasons where the mother, or explanations where the mother could have been. A very, very big one, a very sad one, unfortunately, is that oftentimes in populated areas, beaches that are not remote, there is interaction between humans, dogs, and these wild seals. And when that occurs, if there is that interaction and people come too close or dogs come too close, the mothers take off. It's a natural response. If they don't know what they're seeing and they consider us or the dogs as a predator, they will leave and they will not come back. And this, we don't know if it was this particular case or if it was another reason that the mother might have gone foraging and just never came back, or something happened to her. We do not have the answer for this, but what we do know is that Quaddy was not old enough to move on and survive on his own. And in that case, what that also means is when an animal like that comes into the hospital, that animal has not learned how to eat fish. That is a very, very important aspect of the rehabilitation process that we need to take on and ensure that animal gets its necessary nutrition and hydration in a form that is appropriate for his age.
Let's go back to the process of getting from the ferry to Bourne, or maybe I should say Buzzards Bay, because that's the part of Bourne it's in. What was the first thing that happened to the seal when the seal came off the boat? I know you weren't there, but.
That's right.
Do you want me to take that on, Lisa? I'll answer that part and then let you pick up when he got to
Sure.
you.
You were there, correct?
Yeah, I was there. I brought him across. So we actually, one of the crewmen and I loaded him onto a cart, rolled him down the ramp, rolled him over to the National Marine Life Center pickup truck and lifted him into the back, and their staff member looked at him and said, "Yep, based on what I see and based on the photographs that we've had, I brought a bunch of hydration stuff. We need to get, I think it was something like 1,000 mils into him before we even transport him. And so we put the needle in. I steadied Quaddy while the NMLC staff member put the needle in. We started hydration. He wasn't taking in the fluid as quickly as we hoped. I was supposed to leave on the next ferry. So we did a little of, a little pressuring of the fluid. And then they loaded him into the back of the truck, closed the thing, and took off for Bourne, and I went back on the ferry.
So back to Lisa, you were waiting for him at the facility. So you got to see him as soon as he arrived there?
Yes. Yeah. It is very important. Again, the stress level is not to underestimate during a procedure like this. So we really, when the animal arrives at the hospital, we'll try to work with the animal as quickly as we can so that it can also go back to rest as quickly as it can. So Quaddy, just to reiterate, he was in a very, very bad condition. His body was emaciated. He was severely dehydrated. So what that means, in other words, what Scott mentioned, he was skin and bones. He was non-responsive. He was really close to death. It was very important to get him the hydration that he needed to make him survive. So when he arrived, the very first thing that we did was to collect some blood from him and then give him some oral fluids and subcutaneous fluids. So with every patient that comes through the door, we collect a blood sample right away so that we not only see the external of the animal, but that we also see what goes on inside. And we try to do that immediately to not have any sort of interference with the food or the fluids that the animal receives. So we collected his blood, we looked at his blood work, and then we tube fed him fluids, and we also gave injectable fluids, what he had received at the ferry, but and with an animal like this, we have to repeat that process multiple times a day to provide that animal with the necessary hydration. And the tube feeding process is necessary for an animal that has not learned to eat solid food. So that is a process particularly for pups or animals that are younger. So what that means is that you insert a feeding tube into the animal's stomach, and then with a syringe attached, you plunge your fluids into the animal's stomach. You can repeat that process multiple times a day or at night, whatever is needed. And that's a way to slowly bring that animal back up to health. In his case, as he was non-responsive, even if he had learned how to eat fish, he wouldn't have been able to, because he had lost all his muscle control. He was not able to move. He was really close to death when he arrived.
Now, how long was it before he could actually eat some food?
Yeah, Quaddy was unfortunately a case that we don't see very often due to his really emaciated body condition and all the medical issues that he was dealing with. It took him a much longer time to get to the point where he would be able to swim in the water and then learn how to eat fish. So, and it took him 3 months to get to sort of a health state where he could maintain body control and a certain layer of fat on his body that he could be in water for a short amount of time. Another process that's involved with animals that young that have not learned how to eat fish, we for just sort of a temporary period of time, we have to teach those seals in particular how to eat fish. And the way we do that is that we We take on different procedures after the tube feeding process has been completed, where we insert fish into the animal's mouth, and then we have to, under a restraining procedure, help that animal swallow the fish. Oftentimes in the beginning, what the animals would do is the gag reflex kicks in and they just want to expel that fish right back out. And that is something where they need our help. And then after a while, when that is under control, then we move on to teach them how to track and eat fish underwater. That is a whole nother endeavor that can be, on some individuals can go quicker than with others. Again, for Quaddy, because he was in such bad body condition, it took him a little bit longer than usual to coordinate his body swimming and then at the same time eating the fish. But we have one option that we like to introduce when we have difficult candidates like Quaddy, is to bring in live fish. That can oftentimes spark the animal's instincts, and also just really not only mimic what happens in the wild, but actually show the patient what would happen in the wild. So we would introduce smaller fish into the animal's pool, and then they can and then we give them some time so that they can really learn how to follow fish and track fish underwater, what it would feel like to sort of nudge or grab the fish or even swallow the fish. And that was a procedure that worked really well for Quaddy.
Tell us more about the pool. How deep, how wide, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is a good question, because we have multiple different enclosures in our hospital, and we move animals around according to their sort of progression. Of course, in the beginning, in the state that he was in almost like in an ICU unit. So he was separated from everybody else, isolated, so that he would be safe and we could provide him with the environment that he needed. At some point, when he was able to be exposed to water, we would just introduce a sort of a very small pool that almost looks like a kiddie pool, where that would be so shallow that even if he didn't move, he couldn't drown. And that's how he started. And we would do that for really short amounts of time. As soon as he was able to build up some muscle, he would move on to the next enclosure that's a little bit deeper. So I want to say probably about 1 meter deep. And then he spent a few weeks in that enclosure, where he would have a dry dock area that he could go to. And then at the same time, he could go into the water whenever he wanted. In that enclosure, he would need to learn how to actually haul out of the water. So the same as he would need to do when he would come onto the beach. So that requires quite some strength and muscle in the shoulder and chest area that he did not have. So he needed a few weeks to build up that strength. And then as soon as he was able to manage and maneuver his body and eat fish on his own, he was moving on into our pre-release pool that's about 2 meters deep, and he was able to swim around, to practice diving, and track fish in a bigger body of water, and haul out onto bigger haul outs from deep water.
Now these pools, I know there's several different ones, but how close are they to a natural environment? Do you put sand in there? Do you put seaweed or anything? How close can you get it?
Yeah, that is a great question. We do take a lot of measures in our hospital to keep the animals as wild as possible and to keep the environment as appropriate as possible. Of course, there are limitations, just due to just the water system. For instance, we would love to put sand in there, but that would cause a problem for our life support system, the filtration that happens with the water. So we are lucky enough here in Buzzards Bay that we get straight ocean water from the canal. However, we do filter the water while it's in the pool. So if we had sand in it, we would obviously have some problems with our drains and pipes, unfortunately. But other than that, we put a lot of effort into providing an environment and what we call environmental enrichment devices to have the animal engaged, have the animal getting used to objects in the water, whatever it may be, interact with objects and sort of displaying sort of a curious and investigative behavior. So in terms of seaweed, for instance, we have an environmental enrichment device that looks like seaweed. It's car wash strips attached to balls or pipes that we put in the water that sort of mimics seaweed. We also have a bunch of other objects that that the animal can play with. We have some buoys and shells that the animal can learn to haul out onto while it's in the water. We also provide some devices that are food related. So for instance, we would freeze some herring in a bucket of water. So when we provide that as an environmental enrichment device, the animal will have to learn to get the fish out of that sort of blob of frozen water. So there's multiple different ways to get that animal sort of used to what it might be experiencing out in the wild. Depending on the species, we can also introduce another patient into the pool and provide some social aspects. And not that these animals are necessarily social creatures in the water, but just so that they are exposed to conspecifics and other seals, that they know what they might see out in the wild. So we pay a lot of attention to that. We rotate these devices through twice a day so that the animal doesn't get used to one particular device. And in addition to that, we also sometimes, when it's needed, we introduce some sound machines with ocean sounds to just not only provide the visual cues, but also just some audible cues. So
now, when Quaddy left Bourne, how big was he?
Yeah, so
how much had he
Quaddy,
grown in your facility?
yeah, that is an interesting question, and it is always very exciting to see how much these animals grow, in particular those pups. When we take in older animals, adults or subadults, they don't necessarily grow much in length. I mean, they might gain some weight, but that's pretty much it. For an animal like Quaddy, who was a pup when he came in, he grew from 85 centimeters to about 103 centimeters. So he, almost 20 centimeters in growth while he was here with us. And then in weight wise, he went from 11.6 kilograms to 32 kilograms. So he tripled his weight. He looked like a healthy big seal when he was released. That's what we want to see. That is one of the criteria to determine when an animal was ready for release. It is not the only one, but it is clearly very important to provide that animal with the necessary blubber and nutrition and just resources before it goes out there.
Now, when Quaddy came back to Nantucket, I'm going to assume that it was just the reverse process of getting him to Buzzards Bay, correct? You went through the same
almost. That's correct.
the pickup truck, the ferry. There wasn't anything basically different in what you were doing, except you had a much healthier seal to be transporting.
That's correct. So I think it is a very similar process, and the attention that is required for a process like that is also the same, but it is a little bit on a different level. So when Quaddy was transported to our hospital, of course, surveillance and monitoring was necessary to see that he wasn't dying during transport, since he was already in this really detrimental state. When we brought him back to Nantucket for the release, we had to really consider the opposite. So this animal was very healthy, very alert and responsive, and obviously paid a lot more attention to what was going on around him. The challenge with that is that that causes stress as well, because obviously Quaddy was in a kennel. He was surrounded by people at certain times during that transport. He heard a lot of noises that he's not familiar with. So, and temperature changes. So those are all things that need to be monitored very closely. So in order to manage that is to really provide that this animal has necessary hydration before a transport like this starts. And then in addition to really proper planning so that the transport is really just minimally minimal in length and not necessarily dragging it any longer than it has to be. So what we did before he left, he was in water before we created him for this transport so that his body temperature would be a little bit better controlled. He got some fish for hydration and nutrition before he left. And then we created him. We would keep him under climate control during that transport. And then while he was on the ferry, we had to make sure that there would be really minimal disturbance. So no people around him, no other noise than the ferry noise. And if needed, cool him down with some ice to keep his temperature under control, and then really bring him to the beach as quickly as possible. So it all worked very, very well during that time. The good thing was we did the transport and the release in the morning, so the temperatures hadn't climbed up as they did in the afternoon.
Scott pointed out at the beginning of the show that the seal was first seen on a beach at Hulbert Avenue, which faces Nantucket Harbor, which connects to Nantucket Sound. But that's not where you brought him back to. So Lisa or Scott, whoever wants to jump in, what location did you choose to release him, and why that location?
Based on Lisa's actual advice, we were looking for a place where, first of all, it wouldn't be too rough and too surfy, and there wouldn't be too many people around who were there for other purposes than to see a seal go back into the ocean. In other words, a busy public beach. We also wanted it to be at a beach where there were other seals in the vicinity, and indeed at Low Beach there were.
Scott, I just want to make sure everyone knows where Low Beach is. It's, I guess you'd say it's between Sconset, the village of Sconset, and Tom Never's Head. In other words, it's the ocean, it's not a harbor or Nantucket Sound.
Exactly, and that's sort of what I was getting to, and the fact that we wanted him to be where other seals are currently. They don't actually migrate, but they kind of move around the island. In the summertime, we have very few gray seals on Nantucket. They're more over on Monomoy. They're looking for cooler, deeper water, it appears, and we may get down to dozens of seals on Nantucket versus thousands. And so the ocean side was the place that we selected. The weather was in our favor. We had Low Beach near Sconset as our primary release point. And then over at Quidnet, which is slightly further northeast, we had as our secondary backup beach. And some of that was also dependent on what we were trying to do with this, which was get some footage for public consumption through NCTV.
Now, in the course of this program, people will be seeing some of that footage. Quaddy didn't seem to waste any time getting to the water. Was that expected?
So I might take this on. It was not necessarily expected. So what we want to make sure is when we determine a release, not only from the medical and behavioral perspective, we want to make sure that we provide or we pick a place and a time that works most in favor to the animal. So especially with animals that came in as pups, they may have not been in the ocean before they get released back into the wild. So we want to really take that into consideration and choose a time where the weather isn't too stressful. The beach is accessible and not populated. And in addition to that, it is important to choose the tide so that the animal has an easy access and an easy way into the water. Especially with pups, if we were to release a pup into high tide with a high swell, that would typically not be a successful release because, of course, that animal has not seen or has not necessarily experienced the water. So to make an animal go into a water that is scary is not necessarily very successful approach. So we chose that release site and the timing accordingly for Quaddy, as we knew that he was very young when he arrived. What can oftentimes happen with pups that are getting released back into the wild is that when they get to the beach and they come out of their crates, they really need to scan their environment first and see where they are. And they oftentimes do that. Sometimes they just stick their heads out of the crate and look around and really, scan their environment. Sometimes they come out of the crate right away and then they stop and then they look around and see what's all around them. That is also one of the reasons we try to keep people away from that sort of periphery and sort of the visual area that the animal has, to not scare the animal during that process. Quaddy was behaving in an unexpected way as he came out of the crate and moved straight to the water. That it was an exciting moment to see, as he was not spooked and scared. He looked at the water, he looked briefly to the side, but then he decided to move forward and just go straight in. So it was unexpected, but it was a very exciting moment.
Is there any way you're monitoring what his activities are going to be?
In his case, it is a minimal monitoring approach. So each seal patient that we have in-house gets a flipper tag. A flipper tag is a sort of plastic rototag that you might have seen on livestock before. It is a visual tag. So we attach that, it's a piercing through the webbing of the flippers, the rare flippers in this case, that we attach to the animal, and each animal has an identification number. It's a unique number that is assigned to that particular animal, that then is attached to one of the flippers. In his case, he's a male, so we tend to tag our males on the left side. So his left hind flipper has a white flipper tag that has the number 125 on it. That is his unique number. On the back side of that flipper is our organization's name and the phone number. So if he would ever be found or his tag would be spotted, he would be identifiable and people could reach out to us and tell us that he was seen. There are, of course, other tags, not just visual tags, but also satellite tags, for instance, that collect and transmit data to the satellite. And so that is what some of you may have seen, where you can track an animal day and night. These satellite tags are extremely expensive, so they cannot be attached to every single patient that is getting released. We do use those satellite tags occasionally, but just we're not able to do this with every patient. So Quaddy does not have a satellite tag, but he has his flipper tag. Since he's on Nantucket, we are hopeful that since a lot of people are watching seals, that if he gets seen, that he will get reported so that we know that he's out there.
How long can a seal be expected to live? What's the maximum you would expect a seal to survive?
Yeah, so for a gray seal, it varies between 30, 35 years, sometimes 40 years. Of
Really?
course, yeah, of course, it depends on health. It depends on environmental factors, predation. Unfortunately, a lot of it nowadays has to do with human interaction. Not only what we talked about earlier about disturbance between a mother and a pup, but also boat interactions, propeller strikes, entanglements is a really big problem. Those are all factors that will eventually kill the animal. So in those cases, of course, we will not see the life expectancy of 30 to 40 years.
I'll just add there, Charley.
And please correct me if I'm wrong. We've been talking about gray seals. The gray seal is not necessarily gray, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, they do have some gray in their coat pattern, but they tend to be a little blotchy. There is some black in it. Males tend to be darker than the females, so oftentimes males have a black coat with like some gray or lighter spots. Females tend to be gray and have some dark spots, but of course there's some mix and match. But yeah, especially those males that tend to look very, very dark are not necessarily always identified as gray seals right away. What is very special about gray seals is the shape of their heads. They have this sort of horse or dog-like shape, a very long, elongated face that rarely any of the other seal species have. It is more pronounced in males than in females. So especially when you see an adult male gray seal, it is the most obvious and the easiest to identify when you see the head.
Scott, did you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I'll add to that, that's why they're called horsehead seals. The males have that big Roman nose, almost looks like a horse's head. The females, much less so. I was just going to add, when we were talking about entanglement and human interaction as one of the causes of mortality, we've already had 25 entangled seals on Nantucket this year. And we're getting into juvenile season where the juveniles are always playing around and getting themselves stuck in things. We have managed to free 20 of that 25. And as we're speaking, we've got 2 in Muskeget that we're hoping to go out and find over the next 2 days. But yeah, it's a big issue. There's a lot of ghost gear out there, and it's a pretty calamitous, slow, horrible way to perish.
Before we go, I just want to have Lisa talk about her organization a little bit for those people over here who are not familiar with your work. Tell us about the National Marine Life Center.
Yeah, great. So the National Marine Life Center is a nonprofit organization. The National Marine Life Center rehabilitates and releases marine mammals and sea turtles to advance science and education in marine wildlife health and conservation. So we are located here in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. We have a hospital and a discovery center. So people can visit us, not at the moment, unfortunately, but usually in our discovery center and learn about our patients and see them through cameras. The hospital is off limits as it is a hospital. In fact, where we house our seal patients, our sea turtle patients. We take in different species of both. Some are endangered, some are not. We have some native turtles in-house as well. Some long-term residents and some temporary residents. We run education programs to educate people about marine conservation. And we operate year-round. There is never a time where we don't have any patients in-house. There's a high demand for seals and sea turtles to come in that encounter difficulty or medical problems. So if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, then please check us out on our website or on social media.
May I just finish by talking a little bit about what Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket is up against? And that is, as Lisa said, this is a very busy area. We have responded to 147 animals, and of the teams that run in the Greater Atlantic region from Virginia to Maine, the next nearest team is in just over 100 animals. This is an amazing, vibrant ecosystem, and we really appreciate the support of both the public and of other organizations like the National Marine Life Center who help our group of volunteers function.
Well, we wish you both the best of luck going forward. Thank you again for coming in. And for Nantucket Community Television, I'm Charley Walters. Thanks for tuning in. Please tune in again.